try to make it 1 hour only, because you guys have to leave after 5. But you can only if you try to speak a bit slowly, just to make it very understandable for everyone. Some people will have a harder time to follow all the English, but as pessoas que precisarem perguntar em português podem perguntar, que a gente traduz. We will translate if needed, for if some people have questions and would like to formulate it in Portuguese. So we make a sort of
we've aimed for a 40-minute presentation. Great. So lots of discussion. If you feel like interrupting me and saying what you're doing, and if it's a really bad presentation, I'm getting a ride to the airport. So.
But anyway, let me just briefly introduce you. Well, we started already. They already started the first meeting, and so we have the pleasure to receive here 2 researchers from the UK Met Office, and they kindly offered to give us this talk about how the UK Met Office simulates the land surface in Earth system models. We have been working a few years through a partnership with the UK Met Office. It's called the CSSP Brazil project. It's a project on research on climate services and some aspects of the ecosystem resilience as well in South America. So it's been nice to have been interacting with them for a few years already. And so thanks Arthur and Giorgia for giving this presentation, and the floor is yours. Okay.
Hello everyone. Just want to also pass some thanks to Renata and Celso for hosting us here at MP. And I've been how many people here do know about land surface models?
Not really.
Not really. Oh, that's good. I've made it quite accessible.
Yes.
I'm not preaching to converted already. So a bit of a background about me and Giorgia. We're from the UK Met Office, and we've been working. I've been working for doing land surface modeling for a while, and CST Brazil helped fund my PhD. But this is the first time I'm actually here in the country, so it's a good opportunity for me just to hang around and see what's up. You don't know, the Climate Services Climate Science Field Services Partnership. It's a collaboration between the Met Office and UK universities, such as the University of Exeter, Oxford, and INPE, INPA, and Seminários. My role is as a terrestrial carbon cycle scientist, so I buffer around trying to improve the models. And Giorgia, do you want to introduce yourself, or I can introduce you? Yeah. Okay. So there's a new project, you might have heard of it. Isn't he involved?
Partly, mainly INPA and Unica.
Yeah. So that's the Amazon face experiment. How many of you have heard of it before? Okay. So it's quite a cool thing. They're building they're building massive towers in the Amazon rainforest near Manaus, and they're pumping CO2 out into the local environment to get the photosynthetic response of the trees less uncertain, basically, to get observations on how CO2 affects the Amazon rainforest. And that's what Giorgia is working on, not manually, but scientifically.
It was very funny watching me try to build it out.
Yes, yeah. Giorgia is a software developer, and she is going to present some of her results from the Amazon Base project as an example of how to use Joules. So this is how it was done back in the day. So land surface modeling and sort of climate models came into the fore in the 1950s in America. And they're very quite primitive early on. So they had like a single land tile and maybe like some a simple sort of hydrological scheme as well. And this is the issue. Yeah, we were principally interested in sort of the radiative effects of the land surface. So we weren't necessarily considering they were considering the like radiative effects of CO2 and water vapor. And the land surface models only started getting a bit more complicated in the 1980s. So they started considering the types of leaves for sort of photosynthesis of the types of plants around and influence on hydrology, so evapotranspiration leaves. And ever since then, they've really sort of started to include quite complicated processes in land surface modeling. So if you don't know, land surface models, they form the sort of terrestrial boundary of climate models. So they're sort of the boundary condition of the atmosphere. And they're really quite holistic models. So in the 70s, people were interested in the surface energy flux. In the 80s, they start considering the effect that stomata has on water vapor pressure and the demands of plants on soil hydrology as well. In the 90s, they start having specific plant functional types just to get the right sort of biophysics of the plants. So you've got your broadleaf tropical trees in the Amazon, you've got your conifers and needleleaf trees in the high latitudes. But then I was born, and then it really, in the late 90s, you start to see the emergence of dynamic vegetation, so how forests change over time due to environmental conditions, and the carbon cycle as well. So this figure on the right here is from the Global Carbon Budget. It's published every year, and it basically uses land surface models to estimate the amount of carbon emissions from particular sources, so like fire and other things. So they're quite holistic models. They're very broad and they're very useful, but they're also very uncertain to some extent, so you've got so many processes going on. Does that align with the Portuguese?
Yeah.
So what about Joules? So Joules stands for Joint UK Land Earth Environment Simulator. It's a collaboration between the Met Office, the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology, and UK and Australian partners as well. So it forms the boundary layer of the unified model. So this is the unified model is great because it's kind of like it's both the weather and the climate model. It's just run over different timescales. So Joules integrates into those different modeling components. So this is, yeah, you must know this from your lectures or whatever. It's basically a grid system, but we only consider sort of the boundary of it. So back in the day, in 1998, you had a model called Moses, which is a progenitor of Joules, and that basically was very simple. It used quite simplistic sort of photosynthesis and other things. It had a single canopy layer for the entire grid cell. So grid cells, 100 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and this took me ages to animate, by the way. Along comes the triffids. So if you don't know, this is top-down representation of interactive flora and fauna. Oh, Peter's going to hate me for that. Interact, I don't know, dynamics. Something dynamics. But if you don't know, triffids in the sci-fi world just start moving trees, eating people. And in the 2010s, along comes Joules, and you have these two series of modeling papers. And there's much more development since then, such as fire and nutrients. Right. So how does Joules function? It's a representation of the subgrid heterogeneity. So what is going in this square, this grid cell, basically, and we try and represent that in a few ways. So it's a model that is driven by precipitation and radiation. So it's an energy water driven model, and you've essentially got these tiles within the subgrid. So you've got your evergreen, your broadleaf trees, you've got your needleleaf evergreen trees, your grasses, your crops, your shrubs, your urban areas, your lakes, your bare soil, and your ice. Some people think that's not enough. Yeah, so and this sits in. There's two versions of Joules. You can run it coupled to a climate model, nerve system model, and that with our supercomputer at Met Office takes about. It can simulate 3 years per day in an atmosphere, an AMIP simulation, so it's an atmosphere only run. So it's quite slow. So a lot of people decide to run Joules just independently from the atmosphere and use historical driving data to simulate it. Yeah, and obviously there's code stuff as well. So we're going to be principally focused on the Joules subsystem sort of configuration for this talk. So these are the tiles. I've already gone through them, but we've essentially got this long list of plant functional types and tiles. So the first 13 are plant functional types, and then you've got urban, lakes, bare soil, and ice. Now, one criticism of Joules is that, especially if you speak to ecologists and things, it's not including quite a lot of functionality, which is important for other processes, such as drought resilient trees and other things. So when I was speaking with INPA, they were really like, yeah. Right. Okay, and these are the processes represented in the model. So this is momentum. So this is we've got wind and roughness length in the model. So it's yeah, sort of you're slowing down for wind and other things. You're causing turbulence when you're going through the canopy of all the different sort of tiles of the surface. And then you've got the radiation scheme. So you've got your downward shortwave flux. Then this gets bounced back up, and it or gets reflected back up, and as shortwave radiation. Then you've also got your downward your upward non-wave radiation, and then your downward shortwave long-wave radiation. And then you've got your different sensible and latent heat fluxes as well. And then this obviously warms the surface and sort of feeds back into the soils and various other things. So you should end up with zero flux coming out of the model. I haven't got any equations for you, but if you're interested, I can show you them on paper. So if you think that's fairly well quite complicated, because you've got to consider the parameterization of the canopy and how, say, earthen tiles work, you're going to have a blast with the water cycle of the model. So you've got rainfall coming in, you've got snowfall coming in, and then there's different forms of evaporation. So you've got evaporation from the canopy, and then filtration down into the soil. You've also got water storage in the canopy as well. And then this couples to the river component of the Joule's model. And then you've got my thing, which is the sort of the carbon cycle. So you're considering sort of the photosynthesis. So if it's a C3 or C4 plant, you're considering the respiration from the plant as well. So that's, yeah, it's Joule's is very important for the carbon cycle, and land surface models are very important for the carbon cycle. So it's very important for getting climate projections into the 21st century correct. And then from the plants, you've got litter fall from trees dying, leaves falling off due to phenology, and that goes into the litter, that decomposes based on heterotrophic and other forms of respiration. This is my favorite plot. This is dynamic vegetation. So not only are they like biogeophysical models, they're also they can be ecological models. So you're considering how much growth there is in an ecosystem and how much mortality there is in an ecosystem, and how that may change over time. So if you don't necessarily have to run it with dynamic vegetation, but when you're simulating dynamic vegetation, you're capturing a lot of processes and the sustainability and vulnerability of forest and plant ecosystems. So a big result in the early 2000s was dynamic vegetation sort of demonstrated that at the Amazon rainforest was a tipping point. Partly because you just did not have enough growth to sustain the forest. It's a bit more complicated now. And this is Renata's favorite slide. So this is the Inferno model. So with dynamic vegetation, you're also considering other processes such as fire as a feedback to greenhouse gases and other things. So then this is getting into kind of almost, yeah, you're basically considering the the probability of ignition from people, so it's almost socioeconomic to some extent. The probability of a lightning strike, and then you're also considering the flammability of the environment as well. So how much carbon can you burn there? What's the temperature and precipitation? What's the fire weather like? And generally, if you squint your eyes and look far enough out, the model doesn't do too badly. There's some regional deficiencies. So Jules tends to, if you saw Renata's talk yesterday, Jules tends to overestimate fire in southern Cerrado, and in India, and maybe in bits of Australia as well. But you also can't really trust your observations with fire to some extent. And there's some more nuanced sort of processes represented in Jules' model and in other land surface models, is you can actually do economic studies of impacts on crops and other things. So this is basically the Jules crop model, and you've got some key sort of staple crops represented explicitly in the model. So this is not necessarily plant functional types, this is actually plant families or genuses. And that's quite empirically done, so it's maybe less process based, but this just gives a demonstration of sort of the breadth of a model, in that you can do studies on impacts such as fire, crop, do projections, you do historical assessments. There's a lot of things. This took me forever to translate into Portuguese. So this is all those processes together. Okay. So you've got your sort of carbon cycle represented here. You've got your nutrient cycle and biogenic fluxes coupled to the atmosphere. You've got your sort of feedback in terms of temperature and sort of latent heat and specific heat as well. You've got your water cycle, and yeah, these are the teams which at the Met Office at least work on Jules. You've got your technical group, your data assimilation, and then you're looking at your validation of it, and quite importantly for CSSP Brazil is your impacts. So there's been a lot of work looking at, say, the impact of fire on Cerrado, or the impact on precipitation elsewhere. So I'm not in the work package, so I don't actually know. Anyway, so yeah, so Jules is useful because it improves operational weather forecasts and climate change predictions. It's really quite important to understand land atmosphere water interactions better, and how they may change with climate. You want to also understand carbon cycle feedbacks. So if you don't know, plants absorb 25 to 33% of anthropogenic emissions, so it's a huge sort of sink. That's not global carbon budget. And if you don't know what's going to happen with that in the future, it will affect how much you can decarbonize going forward. So you can also use it to assess strategies and policies to sort of mitigate against climate change. And also, there's some new analysis of the hydrojoules model in the UK, where you're sort of doing 1 kilometre simulations in the UK to sort of assess the risk from flooding, other things. So a bit of calibration. This is calibrating those plant functional types in terms of their nitrogen demand, and leaf mass area. I think, or the nitrogen leaf content, the leaf mass area. So you can use sort of in situ observations to sort of constrain the sort of nutrient cycle of it. And then this is looking at. This is also looking at GPP, I think. Yeah, so more site-based simulations. And you can see sort of the impact of certain processes on the sort of carbon cycle, as it were. And you can also couple it from remote sensing as well to sort of assess how well the model's doing. And I mean, there's so many facets of the model you can look at. So this is trying to parameterize with the CMIP project with using model ensemble to get the bulk functional type distribution correct. And you can look at it to examine river flow of some key rivers. So this is the Amazon up here, and the Congo and various other places. And you could also look at biogeophysical feedbacks and the hydrological cycle more broadly. So evapotranspiration globally, GPP, and albedo. And this isn't necessarily joules. This is CMIP is across a whole suite of models. And then no, CMIP isn't. Sorry, that's wrong. You can also look at the impact of burnt area and other things. So this is how we validate this model. And now I'm going to hand over to Giorgia. I'm going to give more a specific example about Amazon base.
I'm not quite as brave as Arthur because I've given this talk around all of once this time last week. So mine is in both languages, so I can still read it. So I've been working on improving joules modeling capabilities for performing Amazon base site simulations. And then running these simulations with the improved capabilities at the FluxNet LBA sites and plotting the outputs against observation. So here I'm going to look at the first completed new piece of science, which is development called SOX. And compare it to the current joules model and also some other suggested methods of improving the plant responses to soil moisture stress. So SOX is the worst acronym because it's a full sentence. SOX is the Analytical Stomatal Optimization Model based on xylem hydraulics. Please don't ask me too much about what that means. Soy astrophysica. My background is not hydrology. I'm good at modeling, not so confident on the science. So it simulates leaf stomatal conductance responses to climate for specifically woody plants. It doesn't do particularly well with pasture. And it incorporates advances in plant hydraulics and something called optimality theory into the joules land surface model. So optimality theory is currently in joules where we model plant responses to soil stress is it kind of has a set limit. So it gets to the point where it says it'll be stressed and then it becomes linearly stressed. And SOX changes that to get a more realistic response, so it kind of gradually becomes more stressed. But does that in a way where it can still be run in a climate model without slowing it down too much. So, how did you get the list?
It's the top button. Next one down.
So here we have, so the dark blue line here is current joules. The green line up here is SOX. The blue line here was a suggestion from one of my co-workers, which was just give the model more water and see if that solves it. And then I did one combining more water and SOX out of pure curiosity. And the black line is the observations. So hopefully you can see joules on its own does particularly badly. handling the dry season in the Amazon. SOX improves it somewhat, and it seems to be following the line here more. It definitely doesn't improve the seasonality.
So Georgia, the LBA K67 is a tower in the middle of the Amazon.
Oh yeah.
Basically.
So the reason I'm using the K67 site for this presentation is just because it has the least gaps. That is because it has some of the least time for the data collection as well. So you'll find the ones with more data collection will have more gaps, and it's just harder to see on a presentation. So yeah, SOX has improved the sensitivity to reduce soil moisture, hasn't fixed the seasonality. And then this one is one of my more interesting slides for me, which was that when it came to the latent, what is it? Latent heat flux. It's hard one for me to remember because it's not a simple acronym. When it came to the latent heat flux, just adding more water actually did better than SOX did. Now, at first I thought this might be overall, LE was more susceptible to modelling the soil moisture better than it was to modelling the plant responses to it. That may be more specific to this site. So something I learned when I was at IMPA was that this site specifically has a much deeper soil column. And so making the soil column deeper to give the model more water had a better response here, but is not reflected at other sites. So in summary, my initial results are that SOX shows some improvement in modelling vegetation responses to low soil moisture, but it's limited by soil moisture being poorly modelled to begin with, and while other processes for GPP, it seems to be more likely that modelling shortwave radiation needs improving in order to improve the actual seasonality. And this over here is some work from Nick Gedney at the
CH.
Yeah, what's CH stand for?
Centre for Ecology.
Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which is adding more water to the model by improving the soil column, but more realistically than I was doing it, which was just throwing more soil in there. Then my references if anyone wants them. And now
So, yeah, so just a brief summary of Jules. Basically, it's quite holistic. It's got a lot of processes. There's multiple applications you can look at. It's multi-sectoral, so you can look at sort of impacts and other things. And it captures the feedback. Importantly for Earth system models, it captures the feedback somewhat with between the atmosphere and the land surface. And I mean, if it's a process-based model, you can avoid relying on more simple empirical models that might not necessarily capture these feedbacks in your assessments. And there's a lot of negatives. So it is quite a complex model. So if you think about how you fit models, it's not simple linear regression. You might want to build an emulator, for instance, to then try and find out the likelihood of your parameters or whatever. Yes. Is anyone going for the last few bullet points?
What's that?
What is the last few bullet points?
can't read it.
The very last one?
Yeah, oh, the last three.
So the second one is that it could be more friendly.
Friendly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me.
But I'm wondering what's the English for uma fera complexa? The first line was that?
Is it, I mean,
Yeah, what is the English?
hold on a second. Hold on a second.
What is it?
What was
The first limitation was that
a complex beast.
beast? Oh yeah, sorry. It's a complex beast. Yeah, that's you really mean that? Okay.
Yeah, so it could be more user friendly. It's very expensive to run. Well,
Yeah.
Not as expensive as the atmosphere models or
Right.
the aerosol models. And it can be less precise than when you've just got fitted a simple empirical model with not very many parameters. And I just want to give another shout out for Renata. So if you're interested in sort of work and UK-Brazil collaboration and yeah, maybe sort of opportunities there as well. Renata's along with Maria and Anna Bradley from the Met Office have started an early career group, which I think is going quite well.
Yeah.
So there's opportunities to talk every single well, most months.
Yeah.
Roughly a month, every month they have meetings, and they'll help out. We can all help out together with presentations or paper writing or other things. So yeah, if you're interested, reach out to that Gmail account. Yeah, that's we don't have to go into that. Sorry, that's a future of Jules.
Yeah.
That's my presentation. Our presentation.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So I'm gonna open for some questions, and if you have someone from YouTube who written down someone from YouTube would like to ask also, just write down on the chat there. We'll be trying to follow you. Or on Zoom.
Escape.
I just would like to start for one question about you mentioned the development from the models from Moses to Trifid to Jules.
Yes.
And how so Jules is how Moses is more the
So
biophysical component, right?
yes, yeah.
And Trifid is the vegetation dynamic.
Dynamic. Yeah. So
Now Jules has both of them.
Jules has both, and also I think they brought in the better sort of scheme for hydrology and snow. I need to look for the papers again, but yeah. So the way it used to work is you'd have a prescribed land surface as sort of an ancillary to the model. So you wouldn't have to worry about how the land surface necessarily changes over time, but it would be fairly difficult to do future projections on that. But yeah, there's the biogeophysics was principally developed for the Moses model, and I think that was the single tile canopy scheme. So you've not got heterogeneity with canopy heights and stuff, for roughness and momentum and things, and you've got simple leaf functions for stomata and sort of transpiration.
Okay. Alguma pergunta? Yes.
I thought it was very nice to see the correction, I think maybe it's not correction, using the soil moisture and how it affects the GPP. And I was wondering, because you mentioned you have 14 types of vegetation that you can specify. What are the parameters they change in the model depending on what kind of vegetation you choose there?
They'll change the how sort of leaf area index, so the number of leaves you've got in a square meter essentially. That will change among the FTs along with sort of the assumptions they make about height as well. They'll also do a lot of leaf style and sort of how photosynthesis works. So the sort of the iridescence of the leaves and things. Yeah, with photosynthetic pathway as well, whether it's seed or seed or plant. Water demand there's a whole bunch of stuff you can change with PLDs, like nitrogen limitation, sort of little rates as well, so phenology. If you've got a deciduous tree, it's going to lose its leaves during winter in the high latitudes. But if you've got an evergreen tree, it won't. And then you've got dynamic stuff like what. Yes.
Let's see, there's someone in the chat here.
Excuse me. So thanks, Arthur.
Sorry.
Thank you for the seminar. Thanks. Bye.
I had another. I had another question about the Amazon phase. Well, I mean, you started simulating with just the standard concentration on. There's no increase in CO2 yet on these simulations, right?
Not at the
Yeah,
moment.
so at the moment, we're kind of trying to set up the simulations to get the best representation of current behaviour, so that we can start using data as Amazon-based starts producing data to model out further. But yeah, so not at the moment, we haven't.
No, but I assume that's the goal later on, right? So
The goal is to set something up that models it as well as we can to then use the data from Amazon base to do some future predictions.
because the one important thing to consider is the nutrient limitations for climate for CO2 increase.
Good you mentioned that. So nutrient limitation is the next thing I'm working on, is to get the current version of the phosphorus limitation scheme
Right.
into the main JAWS model.
Yeah.
So it's sat on someone's branch at the moment, and once I get hold of that branch, I will be working on putting it in.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Amazon's quite phosphorus limited. environment.
So
In CD, the program uses only forests, no CD.
There is the city tile,
so there's an urban tile.
Sure.
but I'm not too familiar with it. But they have, I think they've got like heat canyons and stuff like that. So they've got an empirical relationship to describe density of buildings and how that affects sort of things.
Yeah.
So it might have changed since I last.
The last time I spoke to anyone about it, it could use work, but it is there.
More complex.
Yeah.
But the challenge with land surface models is you're trying to capture it at 100-kilometer resolution. So a lot of the sort of complexity is sort of blurred out, hopefully. You're looking at the mean state for that grid cell.
The resolution of model is kilometer.
So it can vary. It's fairly arbitrary with what resolution you choose at, but Joules Earth system is parameterized for the N96 grid. So that's 96 longitudinal grid cells at view. So that's in Brazil, I think that's like roughly 130 kilometers, something 120 kilometers. So yeah, people still consider it a too simple model. So
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
How difficult is it? I know we've discussed this before, but how difficult is it to, for example, couple with more detailed, like, trait-based models, for example, to increase the number of PFTs and maybe downscaling to?
It could be quite difficult. You'd have to find resources to actually someone to develop the model. And if it is one of the weaknesses, as I said, was that learning curve actually getting around to developing the model, because it's written in Fortran. Got to figure out how to test it, how to run it, and the processes are going through it. But to do something with the trait-based models, so trait-based models, if you don't know, they're vegetation dynamic models that calculate productivity and stuff. But instead of, say, 13 plant functional types, they'll have 6,000. And that is a bit sort of intractable for this type of model. I mean, there's nothing stopping you putting 6,000 functional types in. But it won't necessarily go into the main trunk of the code. That being said, I think this is an area that the Met Office would be interested in looking at, and it would be very interesting more scientifically, is how do the trait-based models that say input use on the terrestrial carbon cycle aligns to this much more simple modeling.
It could be done, though not easily. But you might struggle to run on the kind of timescales that we're running on, because it was the only way I can think to do it is by like getting the trait-based models to do the calculation and then sending us to us for each time step. And that's going to mean taking much longer to let trait-based model do its job and then we will. So it would slow down for the kind of timescales that we're running on.
And then similarly, it's quite difficult as well to use other inputs data that are not already there, right? So, for example, I'm using population density. I can't just get my own population density
You could.
input and everything.
I don't know how population density is handled, but
Before fire, you have to match it with your driving data resolution.
Yeah,
So you might have to regrid your population data, but there are files or inputs called ancillaries where they're relatively they're sort of used as an addition to using the model. So I think that would affect your distribution of file.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions online?
Yeah, that foi online, não? That's just they're chatting about the. I have another question. We are also interested in land use change effects, not only the natural vegetation dynamics, but do you know how do you handle land use change on this type of modeling?
It's changing. So originally we would look at net land use change. So in a grid cell, what is your abandonment of land minus the amount of land that you deforest or get rid of, so your net. And then that would get that reduction or would reduce the fraction of vegetation by that amount, basically, and assign it to either pasture or grassland or urban.
Okay.
Yeah. One question.
No. No, nobody asked. Okay. So if you don't have any additional questions, we thank you again very much for the talk and yeah, that's it. Thank you for everyone. Muito obrigado a quem está online também. E é isso aí, muito obrigado. Pode fechar, Ângela, por favor.
Except